Are you someone who really wants to speak up in support of equity and fairness and inclusion and find yourself worried, unsure, afraid of messing up, or maybe worried about what criticism might come your way? Yeah, I worry about those things too. So many folks say, I want to be a good ally, but just tell me what to do. I wish it were that easy, but there are some things that we can do that can help you be more effective in your efforts to bring about greater equity and inclusion. Today, I want to talk about aspiring allyship and how you can be a better aspiring ally for us all. I began thinking about allyship as looking at my own aspiring allyship and others. And I began thinking about this in terms of why is what I'm doing good and what I see some of these folks doing bad. And I started to distinguish between me and them. And then I started thinking maybe it's more about me and me, because then the things I was so easy to criticize others about, I also, when I was really honest with myself, I was doing those things too some of the time, but not all the time. So I started asking what makes me better at this in these moments and not so good at it in these moments. And that's where I started to think about this less in terms of distinguishing good from bad allies, but in terms of our identity as allies. Now, allyship is not an identity, but it is an action that we do. So I want to be clear about that. And I think our identity as aspiring allies, how we think about that term, has an impact for our effectiveness, for the outcomes, for our consistency, and for sustainability. You're going to hear me use the term aspiring allies, and that's really intentional. I worry about folks who say, I am an ally. I prefer that folks who are marginalized decide who are allies on their behalf. I worry about self-identifying as allies. But I also see the power in people saying, I'm trying, I'm doing my best. And aspiring allies are those who are trying to be allies, and we will let others decide if they're living up to that, if we're living up to that, if I'm living up to that. So a lot of this thinking and learning and conversations with others, and looking at a lot of the scholarship, led me to this model of aspiring allyship. I wrote about it, I submitted it, it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and today I want to share it with you. I share it with many organizations, with many groups, and with many aspiring allies. I also, to be honest, think about this at least once a week and many times daily as I think about my own efforts to be an aspiring ally, to work toward justice and equity, both in how I maybe want to do it and maybe when I'm doing it, when I've messed up or when I've gotten some criticism. It's useful to me in helping me think about my allyship and doing it better. So I want to help you learn about 3 different ways we might think about ourselves as aspiring allies and the implications for our work. This is the aspiring ally for self-interest, the aspiring ally for altruism, and then the ally for social justice. The first stage is really those aspiring allies, those of us from dominant groups who experience privilege the way the world is set up. So we might think about white folks or men or able-bodied folks or others who experience privilege and dominance the way the world is currently set up. Now, there maybe are people from dominant groups who don't care about equity and inclusion and aren't even invested in that. And we're not talking about that. So those are sort of off to the left on this. But for those who do, often an entry point for us is this aspiring ally for self-interest. And that's when we start to have someone in our life who emerges who reminds us that this is important. So it might be a friend who comes out to us, and we start to care about LGBT issues for the first time, or it might be someone we care about who maybe was harmed and we don't want them to continue to be harmed. It's usually personal. It's usually a very specific person who we can name, or it's a face that we see. So it's very specific about that. And often in this place, we really want that person to not be harmed. Now, this is really great because we know someone we care about. It personalizes this for us. And we might speak out and prevent them from being harmed. We might not let anybody make any jokes about gay folks around our friend John who just came out. And that can be good. The trouble here is when our friend John isn't around, we're not going to intervene because our friend, who we have a personal relationship, isn't at risk. And so we might not speak up when that person isn't around. We might even engage in that behavior too because the person we care about isn't at risk of being harmed. And here, we don't really see systems of oppression. We see individual acts of hate. And if we can just stop those individual acts of hate, then things are going to be okay for those people we love and care about. The next place is the aspiring ally for altruism. And here we're speaking up for all of those who might be harmed. So it's not our friend John who just came out. It's for all LGBT folks. It's for all people of color. It's for all women. And maybe we're thinking about trans folks, or maybe we're not. And so it's for all of those folks who might be harmed by the systems of oppression. And that altruism for them, for that group, can be a really great motivation because we know that many folks are being harmed as a group by the systems and structures that are in place. And this is often when we recognize that this is not about individuals who are committing acts of hate, but this is really also systems and structures that are in place in the world and the society that we live in. Often this is an awareness that we do experience privilege, and we feel really uncomfortable with that, and we often actually want to distance ourselves from other members of the dominant group. This is often a place where we demonize white people or we demonize men. You know, white people are doing these horrible things, or can you believe the stuff that men do? And really what that is an awareness that we are part of a dominant group that has caused harm, that does experience privilege, and we want to distance ourselves from them. So by demonizing other white people, what I'm really saying is, look at me, I'm an exceptional one, right? I'm different from all of them. Or by talking about all the harm that men do, what we're saying is, I'm an exceptional version. Or one of the things I find myself is I might be distancing myself from a previous version of myself that I can no longer be with. And so our efforts to protect and reduce harm for members of minoritized and marginalized groups, we can do a lot of good work. However, the downside here is because we're doing it for them, we can fall into this hero, rescuer, savior role, which actually reinforces the power dynamics around oppression and actually contributes to it in some icky ways. Another part here is that we're so determined to be exceptional and distinguish ourselves that when we do mess up, and we all do, and we get criticism or feedback or an awareness that we've messed up, that's really hard for us to deal with. And we tend to be very defensive and push back on that. And being defensive against feedback is one of the ways we also reinforce those paradigms. So whenever I feel defensive, this is a really good reminder for me to check in with this and see if I can move to the next place. And the next place is an ally for social justice. So the other two are labeled as aspiring because I don't think they're actually fully actualized allies. This is the one where I think we want to aspire to, maybe reach from a time, and then slip back and continue to aspire to. The ally for social justice does still care about those people who are harmed by oppression. But we add to that, for them, we add to that an enlightened self-interest. And an enlightened self-interest says that I, as a white person, am deeply harmed by racism against people of color. That I, as a man, benefit in concrete and real ways from patriarchy and systemic oppression, and it damages my life every single day. When we recognize how we would all benefit, despite the concrete and real privileges, by giving up those privileges, by the sense of humanity, the sense of self, the relationships, the societal good that would come from our collective liberation, that's our enlightened self-interest. And when we tap into doing it for those who are harmed and our own enlightened self-interest, that really shifts how we show up. This means we're not focused on getting credit or needing praise. And when others offer us feedback or criticism, we welcome it. That criticism, rather than an attack to be defended against, becomes a gift toward our own liberation. And so how might we think about that in those ways? So when I do feel defensive, I think, oh, I'm in that aspiring allyship for altruism. I want to think about my own enlightened self-interest and how this is an issue that also, while granting me privilege, also harms me in concrete and real ways. One of my favorite quotes is from Australian Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson, who says, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And what Lilla Watson is talking about here is that enlightened self-interest. And when we tap into that enlightened self-interest to work with those who experience oppression, we become much more effective, consistent, and sustainable allies for social justice. One of the things I want to encourage you is to continue on your journey as an aspiring ally. If you don't feel like you've got it all figured out and you're not quite perfect, that's good. Perfectionism is one of the really insidious things that the dominant culture instills in us, instills in me, that we need to get past. If you're trying, if you're taking responsibility, if you're willing to learn, and then try some more, this is a group project. The process is about all of us working together, each of us in our own ways, toward collective liberation. Now, I'm going to put in the links below in the description some links, some handouts, some resources, and a link to the article. You can read all about it if you'd like to, and add your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about what challenges you face and how maybe this is helpful for you in thinking about your aspiring allyship. I look forward to hearing from you, and yes, I will read them all.